We appreciate all of the guests who have appeared on our show and sincerely thank them for providing you, our audience, with useful information. However, the advice our guests provide is theirs, and we encourage you to seek out a professional if you have specific questions about any topic we cover on the Crushing Debt podcast. On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt podcast, finding and keeping happy employees.
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney Shawn Yesner, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. My name is Shawn Yesner, owner and founder of Yesner Law, and we've got George Corbello back in office, studio, I don't know, whatever this is. Welcome, George.
Hey, guys. You're a financial coach, and I'm having good vibes.
And for those of you watching, we are also trying to figure out how to record these so that we can put them up here on YouTube or put them up on video. And so that's why you're going to see the side of my face, and there's George, and then we've got a guest in studio this week who we'll get to in a minute. Before we do that real quick, I want to give some love to one of our two sponsors. The first one is Mark Purvis. Mark is the guy that makes us sound really good. He is our editor. He's been with us since the very beginning. Mark's got a project called LegacySpotlight.com. And so what would it be like for you to capture or keep the stories for future generations? Or what would it be like if you could capture the stories for future generations or of your previous generations and capture your family stories? Mark's got a way to do that that's fun. It's all on his website, LegacySpotlight.com, where you can preserve or listen to past relatives for future relatives, all that kind of stuff. Mark will make it fun. He'll come out with all of his recording equipment. Again, it's LegacySpotlight.com. But I want to talk about and to our guest on this week's show. She is a former guest on the show. You can hear her on episode 229, which was titled Emotional Support Peacocks. She's got two areas of her law firm. One is pet law, which is what we talked about back in 229. The other is employment law. And that's what we're going to talk to her about today. So she's the owner and founder of the Goodwin Firm, a law firm in Largo, Florida, with two primary areas of practice, employer rights and pet rights. She assists small businesses throughout the state of Florida to navigate the complex world of employment laws and regulations from the time they hire their first employee all the way through defending them in local, state, and federal agency claims and state and federal lawsuits. She believes there's no reason that we can't do our work in a fun environment and design the office with that in mind, using bright colors, pop culture, including comic books and superhero decor. She's been a superhero nerd throughout her life. One of her favorite superheroes, mine too, by the way, is Spider-Man, whose motto is, with great power comes great responsibility. When she opened the firm, she set out to use her superpower of being able to help others navigate the confusing and complex legal system in a way that made her feel that she was making her client lives better and also making the world a better place. She found that purpose in the underrepresented pet law area. She received her undergrad degree from The Ohio State University. Do I get to say The Florida State University?
We trademarked it, so no.
Okay, fine. You trademarked the word the?
The, yes.
They did. They succeeded in that.
Nice. Her JD from Ohio Northern University. She's a member of the Florida Bar, the U.S. District Court for the Middle, Southern, and Northern Districts of Florida. She lives in Pinellas County, Florida, with Ryan and their Australian Shepherd, Chewy, or short for Chewbacca. Welcome back, April Goodwin. Welcome, April.
Thank you.
Wanted to talk to you about, we've got this, what we're calling the Great Resignation. In 2021, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, over 47 million Americans voluntarily quit their job. Now, that was post-COVID, right?
Right, yeah. So what happened was actually this was going on since 2009. I forget the exact number, but I want to say it was like just a fraction, but still increasing year after year for people resigning. Instead of decreasing, it was resigning. So this has been a trend that's been going on for quite a while. There was a brief stop in that trend in 2020 because people were freaking out and holding on to their jobs and not making a lot of moves while COVID was really rampaging. So after that ended and people came back to work or were asked to come back to work is when the resignation happened. And a lot of it was retirement, actually, people who just didn't want to come back from retirement.
But it sort of bled into, I mean, one of the issues that we're dealing with now, I am the president of our homeowners association, and we can't get lifeguards to stick around to save our lives. You know, it's we're having trouble finding and keeping good employees. You hear all over the workforce. So if people are resigning, wouldn't it make sense that there's more jobs available for people that want those jobs?
Yes, but the thing is again, one of the causes of this is actually, the Great Retirement, and it is baby boomers who chose early retirement, who didn't want to, maybe not early, but decided, close enough, I'm not going to come back to work, after COVID. And so those are going to be not your entry-level jobs. Those are going to be more experienced jobs, higher-paying jobs, and that's, it's kind of everybody's shifted up, I guess, kind of like when you have a spreadsheet and you delete and it says, ask you if you want to move all rows up. That's kind of what happened, to the workforce is people are moving up, which is why you're having a harder time fulfilling entry-level jobs, whether it's a lifeguard, restaurant, even in office work, your entry-level, file clerk or office assistant. Those are the ones that people are having problems with more, not that they're not having problems even with lawyers and, doctors and veterinarians, everything.
Well, but I thought it was just everybody was, going to become the YouTube star, and that's what we're kind of working towards, right? Isn't that the case?
I think they found out during lockdown that wasn't going to happen. So I'm trying to do that. We're doing that. I know what this is for. We're video. Yeah, this is going to be all of us, right?
Yeah. I got to say though, the one thing that lifeguards and things of that nature, for me, I think is it the kids, again, your entry level, right? So a lot of it too, I've been hearing, in articles and hearing it's, the entry level jobs, what they're paying. So no offense to Florida, but as much as we think it's cheap to live out, it is, it can be expensive depending on rents and places to live, to be able to eat. Obviously, are we in a recession? Are we still in a recession?
We're in a recession.
There you go.
They say you don't know until it's done, pretty much.
Right. But I thought they redid the rules, and I think it's something different. Well, anyway, it just...
Well, but at the same time, you've got inflation going on right now.
Right.
And we're also increasing the minimum wage, right? We're going up to, $15 an hour starting...
In a few years, $11 an hour starting in October.
Okay,
so it'll go up every year after,
Yeah, from 22 to 25, I think, right? Yeah. So by 2025, minimum wage is going to be $15 an hour, and even that may not necessarily be keeping up with the cost of living and inflation.
Well, in Tampa Bay, it's $15 an hour to basically have rent a one-bedroom apartment full time. So a lot of people have talked about, these are jobs for kids. They're not. Minimum wage jobs, unfortunately, are, what a lot of people live on. But to go to your point is that the wages, so what's happening again is if the more experienced people didn't come back, then those are the higher paying jobs. So everybody kind of moving up means that those entry level jobs where you could, where you only paid even $15 an hour anymore for an entry level job is not necessarily acceptable depending on what the job is. So those people, it's not that they're not working because $15 is obviously better than nothing.
Correct.
They're able to find $20 an hour jobs because everybody has kind of moved up the chain. And the other thing too is it's not just money. There have been studies that show for, in jobs where you can, kind of be hybrid or work remotely. If you're requiring your people to come in, you're gonna have to pay them about $10,000 more.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I gotta admit with that, the working from home and that hybrid kind of work, that seems to be a big, especially in the corporate world, that seems to be a big, kind of showstopper itself. People love the flexibility to be able to do their jobs and do the things. And again, most of the meetings that we have are Zoom. So where, do I have to be in the office itself? And that seems to be also driving up some of the, again, you're right. I can get paid higher and be remote. That's awesome.
Right.
So we're seeing a lot of that transition as well.
I think it might impact the commercial market as well. I mean, even looking here at my own firm, I've got an office that's not being used. Mm-hmm. If all of the employees of the law firm were here in the office, we'd be busting at the seams. We wouldn't have room to add any other people. But if I can give my people remote access, now I don't need as much space, and so I don't need as big a commercial space.
Right.
And so that's driving down, actually, some of the expenses that the law firm pays in a good way.
In a good way, right.
Right. It is my understanding, I'm not a commercial realtor, but from having talked to one relatively recently, that market is actually kind of hot too. Maybe not as hot as the real estate market, residential real estate market, but so somebody, and it is a weird thing, like, Shawn, you were saying with the, where are these people? Somebody's working somewhere, and it's kind of the same thing with real estate. It's like people are living somewhere, moving, and working somewhere. So it is kind of an interesting shift that we're in now, and the pandemic's exacerbated a lot of these problems. Right. But as far as the Great Resignation, that was actually happening already, and a lot of what happened in 2021 was the people who would have retired or resigned one way or the other stopped working in 2020, kind of got caught up.
Yeah.
So some of it's from that.
But I want to kind of turn back to, because I know you've represented both employees and employers, but now in the law firm you've got to focus on representing the employers, and I think this impacts kind of two ways that we can talk about. The first is lowering standards on who the employer wants to hire, because I need a body in the door. And then the second way I think that impacts things is I need to make sure that I'm keeping my employees happy to keep the ones that are here, because if I have to try to find someone to replace them, that's going to be its own process. And so there's issues inherent in both of those, right?
Correct. I mean, you need to be careful in just hiring anybody just because you're swamped and you're, you need somebody.
Shawn. Yeah, you got to be careful on who you get to co-host.
I know.
Right?
I was going to say, here's a mirror. Can you fog it?
Yeah, but it is. You do have to be careful of that. And a lot of that starts with how you are advertising. So, the shift in it was employer friendly, or the thought was, even if it turns out looking at the numbers it wasn't exactly correct, an employer friendly market before 2020, and I think maybe now it's just the employees and potential employees are aware that it's not an employer friendly market,
right? And
asserting that knowledge. But the problem is that there are people who are still advertising for employees in the same old way that they were doing before, and so it really starts there with making sure you get the right people, because I hear that all the time, even in law firms and other, white collar businesses, to get even professionals in. Like, I'm putting ads out, and I know everybody just graduated from law school or med school or dentistry or veterinary school or accounting or wherever, so they're out there looking for jobs, but I can't get anybody. And then you look at their job posting and you see why, and you got to shift from being this is what we want to this is what we can offer you. And that helps a lot. And not to say that when somebody gets in the door in the interview or afterwards that you don't, obviously bring that out to make sure you're a good fit. But you got to be careful how you do that. Like, for example, I saw a job posting for an attorney that said, our attorneys need to do everything. Sometimes you're the janitor. No attorney's going to apply for that. But when they show up and you go, and on their first day you go, oh, by the way, you got to take your trash out too. Nobody really thinks twice about that.
Right.
But if you're advertising for that, so you got to get people in the door. And it's an ad. It's called an ad for a reason. And you've got to, if you went and advertise for your clients in that way of, this is what we want from you, even though we all think that way, and we all have our internal processes for weeding people out or screening people, you can't really put it out there like that. So that's the first step, really, in stopping your Great Resignation, is getting the right people working for you.
Is there any argument, I don't know how to say this nicely, so I'm just going to say it.
Okay, be nice.
We're not doing it anymore, but last year, when people were getting monthly subsidies from the government, or when we were getting like an advance on the child tax credit, and the government was just passing out money, sometimes I got the sense, as nicely as possible, sometimes I got the sense that people were interviewing for jobs and then not taking the jobs just to continue to collect unemployment and to continue to collect the money from the government, easy money.
Yeah.
Is that, am I off base? Or was that happening, or am I just insensitive?
Well, I can tell. Well, all of those things can be true. But I can tell you anecdotally. So at that point, I was moving from representing, employees and employers to just employers. But I still had a couple employee cases, and I had clients who told me, like, I was settling employee clients settling their cases, and were like, so how am I going to get this money? Because I'm collecting unemployment, and I got to be careful how, so yes, that was a thing. I think it's a thing whenever. There's always somebody who's happy. There are people who, even the lower amount now, which is next
It's
for
really
us, it's
nothing.
next to nothing.
Right.
But for other people, that's enough. And compared to what they might have to be doing in order to, be out and twirling a sign for $100 a day in the Florida heat, taking $220 a week to sit at home doesn't seem like a bad idea.
Right.
So that is, there are always going to be people who are like that. But I do think it was more because it was higher, and it was all. They maybe could have pinpointed things, made a more focused way of giving that money out. But unfortunately, I think that was part of it. But Florida ended it early, and Florida ended it, I think, like a year ago.
Yeah.
And we're still we're still affected by the Great Resignation. So it's not just that, but it certainly didn't help, I think, in.
Well, I think it definitely helped with your I would say the restaurants definitely impacted a lot of those groups itself, because I think a lot of those people worked off tips. So when you talk about like, hey, just a steady income, and unemployment, especially since they lost their jobs as part of the COVID crisis, I guess, they were just like, hey, I'm going to milk this until we stop. And then when that train stopped, it was, let's go back. Now I've got to, work hard, get to be able to make the same amount of money with no minimum wage. Again, it's different when you have like restaurant workers and things and those folks. So it's interesting. I mean, I definitely, Shawn, you're not insensitive, but at the same time, there is, I would say some population would definitely fall into that category for sure.
Line cooks were the profession that with the most people who died in COVID.
Wow.
And you think about it, they don't have, this is near and dear to my heart. My significant other is a chef, so, but they are. In fact, he's the one who sent me that article way back when. But there are, they don't. A lot of them don't have sick time.
Right.
A lot of them don't have health benefits.
Right.
And so, they, as it is with regular flu and cold, they go to work sick. So that was happening with COVID.
That's not good.
That's not, no, and that is something always to think about in that situation. But anyway, that is, they were the ones that were the worst, because you think maybe the first responders or the hospital people, but they had PPE eventually, and they had a lot more they have sick time, they have access to health care and benefits and things like that. So it was, so that again, it could have been one reason too why those restaurant people didn't want to go back. Either they weren't, and sadly weren't there to go back, or they have friends or coworkers who died and said, screw that.
Yeah, not worth it.
And the restaurant work's horrible.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, there's a lot of stuff that I intentionally don't want to know about the restaurant industry.
Yeah.
I just want to go and enjoy my meal, and that's all I want to do.
That sounds like a bonus episode there.
Yeah.
There are places I can't eat because he's worked there before, and he's like, no, we're not eating. I'm like, oh, okay.
What about the old adage, slow to hire, quick to fire? Is that something that could potentially be an area that could cause liability to the business owner?
Quick to fire, in theory, I get that. As an employment attorney, that makes my eyeball twitch, because I like people to analyze why they are firing somebody. Now, obviously, somebody does something that is verifiably illegal that you've seen yourself, or, they punch somebody, they just stop showing up, things like that.
Right.
They steal from you, don't second guess yourself there. But sometimes, even though we are an at-will state, it should still be, which means you can fire anybody for any time. It means they can quit at any time too, unless there's a contract. It is better to think about it and to make sure that you are following your own policies, and to have those policies and to have a system. Now, if you have a system in place already of discipline and of this is, what's fireable and this is what we do, and then I feel safer about saying, be quick to fire. But otherwise, make sure your ducks are in a row, and it's always good to talk to somebody objective, preferably, your employer lawyer, but somebody who can kind of look at the whole picture as well.
Well, and sort of along those lines, and you touched on it before, not all employees, a lot of employees, but not all employees are necessarily motivated by money. I even know, here, for example, one of the benefits that I gave was the ability for the employees to work from home even after COVID ended and we all came back in person. I'm still kind of a dinosaur. I like being in an office. Plus, it's less distracting. I love my wife and kids, but it's less distracting to be here than to be home with them. But what are some other things potentially to keep employees happy so that they don't start causing trouble and suing and
Yeah.
all that stuff.
And that is the other thing too. And so as you're, in employment, and just talking about like one reason to keep people happy isn't just because it's a cost of turnover in and of itself, but that is the time when people are most, whether they quit voluntarily or they are fired, definitely more likely if they're fired, but also if they quit voluntarily, where they are more likely to try to sue you or to talk to an attorney or threaten, which is even if it doesn't end up happening, it's stressful and can be expensive, even just answering a demand letter. And just because they don't have any cause to do it doesn't mean they won't try. But yeah, so the things you can do to keep them happy that are non-paycheck oriented, certainly if you're able to do remote or hybrid, that is a big thing. I think hybrid, frankly, is the future, because I do think while some people are good with being at home 100% of the time, and that certainly works for many people, others, you miss. There is something about that camaraderie and all that you're just not able to get over Zoom, and that helps you grow your business. That's the biggest thing: get people invested in your business, and it's hard to do when you're all remote.
Well, and it's hard to do. I mean, I get it, and I think my employees in general are invested, but nobody's going to be more invested than me. It's my name on the door.
Well, no, they should not. And I don't necessarily mean literally invested, but no, invested in the success. So, for example, my paralegal she might be more invested than me. I don't know. She's kind of crazy, and she's kind of
in
other
legal
people,
terms, is that what that is?
crazy? Yes, that is.
It's a technical term.
Yeah, but she cares very much about not as all my employees do, but she's the most extreme of the success of the business and all, and those things. So getting them involved in that way. So for example, my intake person who's relatively new, and we do paid consultations, and I said, okay, for every paid consultation you get signed up, you get X amount of dollars. Okay. It's not a percentage or anything, but it's just a bonus for your time. And
a discretionary bonus.
Yes, exactly. She's great, and she was doing her job great, and I saw increases even before I gave her that bonus. But I tell her that, and she's like, "Oh, I can take your cards out now," and I'm like, "You could have done that before, like you didn't, So there are little ways, and now that's monetary, but it's not a lot of money. To me, it's not a lot of money,
right? But
to her, it was just enough of an incentive. And again, she's a great employee, so it's not she was being lazy before, and I needed to do that. I just wanted to give her a little extra oomph, and actually kind of a reward for how she was doing. So things like that. If you have salaried employees, there is a way to do this if they're hourly too, but it's much easier if they're salaried. Unlimited PTO. Now that sounds scary. Every time I tell people that, they're like, oh, that doesn't mean people can take off whenever they want. You still have a policy. It has to get approval. You can put certain parameters in that, but you're not keeping track of it. Usually you're telling your people to take time off but you're talking about a professional, like an attorney or something. A lot of times they end up doing, working too much. But that's another thing, mandatory, vacations, actually, even for some of those people, has been something. And that seems great, but it helps you too, because people are more productive when they take time off, as long as it's not too much time off. Would they
see you in December. It was really
nice. Yeah, exactly, yeah. Yeah, but that's what people think, like, oh, they can take off whenever. No, and even if you only had 10 days PTO, they can't take off whenever. They have to get approval from you, right? So it's not any different than that. And if they are somehow invested in bringing in business and doing the work, then that is something they're going to do regardless, if you have certain things set up. So example, if it's an attorney, you have so many hours a month they have to bill, that you take a month off of, July, that's great, but you still have to bill your hours, right. So things like that. But, or you still have your ethical duties if you're a doctor, to make sure people get taken care of. So
I've done that here at the law firm, and we do have a policy. I think I give all the employees 10 days off, and then 10 holiday days. So over the course of the year, they get 20 days off, but I don't really track it. And my wife will say to me, wait a minute, isn't so-and-so didn't she already take off? And yeah, but in my mind, they're not taking advantage of it.
Right.
So if I give 10 days, but they actually end up taking 11 or 12 over the course of the year, as long as the people are productive and as long as the law firm's making money, who cares, in my mind? Right,
and that's a shift that's happening too, is from being focused on the amount of hours somebody's sitting or standing or at their station, to in businesses where you're able to do this, focusing on productivity. Now, again, there is, like in trades and things like that, piecework, and that's a whole different way of paying people, and you do have to be careful you don't run afoul of not having your time tracking duties. If you have hourly employees, you are, as an employer, you are under the law, need to keep track of their time, regardless. I recommend you do that for everybody just because it's easier if somebody later on comes back and says, oh, no, even though a salary, I should have been getting overtime. And you can prove if they were working over 40 hours or not. But still focusing on productivity and not like, okay, well, it's 4:55 and you're not sitting at your desk even though, we close at 5 or 4:30 or whenever it is. Are you getting your work done? And that is something, and definitely with salary employees, that is something, that is a benefit to them as well, to not be treated, like, hey, I'm just a warm body sitting here.
Yeah, and I think that's the one thing I've noticed even with corporate jobs and things. If you feel and have people the trust, you hired them to do a job itself, as long as they're doing they're performing at the expectations, or they're doing what they need to do, giving them that flexibility goes a long way. I mean, that for me, if you're going to say happy employee, trusting me to do something or doing it in a certain way and still getting the performance, and it just allows me to want to do more and try different things, fail and succeed, and those options as well. And that's where I see some of the, again, just changes the attitude that we have with those employees.
Absolutely. And trust goes a long way, especially with people being remote. I see that all the time. Employers ask me like, well, how do I know my remote employee is really working? What tracker thing can I get? And like, is the work getting done?
Right.
That's where that comes in more. Not so much how you're paying them, but really, how much you trust them. And if you can't trust them, then they shouldn't be working for you.
Right. Well, and one of the other things, so again, a lot of my people work remote. We're in the office, but a lot of times they work remote. And that's one question my wife asked me is, how do you know they're doing the work? Well, number one, the work's getting done. But number two, they're installed where they have to remote into the office computer. And so as I'm here walking around the office, I see the work getting done on the monitors. I see the mouse moving. I see the emails getting answered. I mean, it's not that I'm sitting at their desk watching their computer, but, if I have to get up to, hit the boys' room and I walk by the computer and, I see her using her mouse and closing windows and opening windows.
She's just doing that knowing there's a camera in here on you. And she's she's moving. No, and my case management system, I can tell when it tells everybody has a log on there of like activity and what's being done in what case. And I can see, somebody added a time entry, somebody did this, somebody did. I fortunately have never had to be like, where the hell is, Andrew, my associate? Right. Oh, okay. No, I'm looking here. He hasn't done anything in 6 hours. I haven't had that, experience. So
I remember my first ever job as an attorney. I walked into my boss's office and I'm like, so it's 5:00, and she looked at me and was like, and I'm like, I think I've done everything I'm supposed to do today. She's
That's
like,
not possible.
And like, can I go home? She's like, you don't have to ask me. If you're done with what you need to do, go home. I'm like, never kind of like.
See, if Andrew tells me he's done what he needs to do by 5, it means I didn't give you enough.
Yeah, I've learned that.
But not that it will be there tomorrow, and that's a big thing for me too, is to make, and I tell my employees too, and there's like, Elon Musk just had made the news again, but talking about this particular thing of where remote employees, he's convinced they don't work. And so there was the article I read about it said, well, he's kind of right that sometimes they're just screwing around, moving the mouse around, but you need those breaks. Right. And so, and that's why I tell my remote employees, I'm like, look, if we were all in the office, we'd be like gossiping at some point or standing somewhere talking about water cooler. Yep. Right. So just because you're home and nobody's talking to you all day doesn't mean, from the office, doesn't mean you shouldn't like get up and walk around or, whatever it may be, take 10 minutes, here and there. If you're not getting your work done, then that's a different conversation. Whether you're sitting, you can be unproductive and sit at your desk and look like you're working all day long.
I've had a few of those. But
I've done those.
Want to give out your contact information real quick, although, again, we'll put it in the show notes, but it's April at Goodwin-firm.com, which is also the law firm's website, Goodwin-firm.com. As we sort of get towards the end, anything we missed? Anything you want to add?
The thing I just want to add is, again, really what you want to do is make your employees as part of your process as you can. You don't have to necessarily, open up your books or anything to them, but the more they feel like it's their company and not your company versus them, then even if you do have to let them go or if they do quit, don't take that personally. It happens. then your liability for getting sued is a lot less great. They did a study that bad doctors with good bedside manner get sued less than good doctors with bedside manner.
Right.
Yeah.
So remember that, but don't, doesn't mean you got to bend over and give them everything they want, but you've got to, remember that the better you can be and the more fair.
Yeah.
Right, treat people
fairly.
with dignity, you know what I mean? That's at the end
exactly.
of the day.
Treat
Yeah,
people
exactly.
fairly.
Yeah, Shawn.
Wow. So, I was going to ask how you're doing, George, but I'm not going to do that
He's
anymore.
gonna skip over now.
I'm just going to skip over that. I do real quick, while we got April here, we do have a second sponsor that we talk about every week on the show, and that's our friend Sam Cohen. He owns Attorneys First Insurance. They provide malpractice coverage, E&O coverage to attorneys and title companies all over. I know he's got a focus on Florida. I know he's got a focus on Texas. And I know, April, that you've dealt with Sam before. So why don't you give our sponsor some love?
Yes, he is my carrier, and not that, hopefully, knock on wood, I won't ever need him. But he definitely, if you're doing title insurance or if you're an attorney, you want to talk to Sam. He's getting great rates, and he will make sure that your assets are protected.
Yeah, he'll give you an apples-to-apples comparison. You can contact him by going to sam@attorneysfirst.com, or his website is attorneysfirst.com. But before we wrap up, George, how's it go? How are you doing? How's it going?
Doing okay, man. A lot of articles about inflation or recession or not recession, and just dealing with that kind of stuff. But obviously helping clients wherever I can to really get through these, I would say, not tough times, but it's, opportunities to be able to invest more. I mean, again, the market's sort of down, and it's like, hey, take advantage. So working with folks to be able to, again, save money, have a budget to be able to do those kind of things. So that's kind of what I've been working on.
Yeah, and I know we've been working on, as this episode comes out, it won't quite be ready yet, but I know George and I have been working on a Patreon page for the podcast. Wow. Maybe I'll do a Patreon page for the law firm. Who knows? But working on a Patreon page for the podcast. And so basically what that's going to do is give all of you as listeners additional ways not only to support the podcast, but to benefit from the podcast. So I think what it's looking like right now, we're going to have a couple different tiers. So depending on how much, and it's going to start, really cheap, $1, $2, a few dollars, whatever. But it's things like, if you just want to help us out because you enjoy the podcast and it does cost some money to produce these episodes every week, or there'll be a tier if you want early video access. So we're going to find a way to start video recording.
Wave to the camera, mate.
There you go. We're going to find a way to video record these. I don't know that I like this camera setup, but we'll get one that works. And
so all we're doing is testing.
You'll get early access to those episodes. We're going to start doing some webinars and seminars. You'll get guaranteed access to those types of things. Things like mentions on the show, commercials on the show, access to me and George for, whatever type of free consultation, whatever. So that's what we're working on. Stay tuned. We'll, as we continue to launch that, we will let you all know what's going on there. But stay tuned. We'll be getting a Patreon page put up here pretty soon. And if you've got ideas,
please,
that you want us to do, absolutely let us know. But I think that'll pretty much do it for this week's episode.
Sounds good. I like it. Thank
Cool.
you, April.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, April. So we will put a bow on this week's episode. We'll end it here. Like I like to say at the end of every episode, we hope that at the end of the month you have more money rather than at the end of the money you have more month. Thanks again, April. Thanks again, George. And we will talk to you in next week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Shawn or connect with us on social media. Shawn Yesner and Yesner Law, PL, are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.